right, welcome to another episode of Piecing It Together, the podcast where we take a look at a new movie and try to figure out what movies inspired it. And today on the show, we are talking about Glass Onion, the sequel to Knives Out, which is out for 1 week in theaters right now at the time that this goes up, and then will be on Netflix very soon, and is a really fun time, and we had a great time talking about it. I've got Joe Black on the show. He was just on just recently, but he's back, and we got a lot of good puzzle pieces to talk about here, so that's coming up in a second. Before we get to it, I want to remind you, as always, to make sure you're subscribed to Piecing It Together wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. We have a lot of episodes coming up to finish out the year, so make sure you're subscribed. And you can also follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. Join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces, where we continue the conversation about all the movies we talk about here on the show. And don't forget about our Produced by David Rosen Patreon, where I post bonus and advanced content from Piecing It Together, Awesome Movie Year, and from my music career. I'm about to release a new album called More Content. The pre-order starts next week, and then the album actually comes out December 30th. So lots of news about my music coming soon. And yeah, we appreciate your support. So, with all that said, let's talk about Glass Onion. Joe Black is back with us to help peel apart the Glass Onion. Joe, how's it going?
It's going great. It's to everyone who listens, it's only been like a week or so, but for us, it's been a couple months at this point.
Yeah,
So,
it's true. These things, you never know where they're going to fit in the schedule, and it just works out that way. But I don't know. I'm super excited to talk about this one. Like I told you, you actually joined me for a screening of it. And like I told you, I wasn't 100% sure. Like, I was certainly looking forward to it, but I didn't know for sure if it would be worth covering in the sense of we talked Knives Out on the podcast before. Will there be enough different stuff with the sequel to really get into? And while I think some of the same themes are, of course, going to come up as did on Knives Out, I think there's plenty to talk about here.
yeah. He really succeeded at making a movie that's completely different from the first one. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, every writer director has kind of like a bag of tricks, if you will, like even the greats. But like
Hmm.
aside from those, the bag of tricks, like the tone, the format, the whole thing is different, and that was one of my favorite things about it. Actually, was that it did not feel like Knives Out,
Right.
and it just felt like the further adventures of Benoit Blanc.
Yes,
So
absolutely. And I think that's what we all want, like, because we've seen a bunch. I mean, we had Now You See Me earlier this year. We of course have the Perot films, and so we're seeing the renaissance of well, not renaissance, the resurgence of these murder mysteries at the moment. And so there's plenty of them. We don't need just another murder mystery. We want another Rian Johnson movie is what we essentially want.
yeah, my friend and producer Joe Neal always joked with me. He's like, you know what your problem is? You're always 2 years ahead of the curve. And
Mm.
like, I'm just saying, before even Knives Out, I was making my murder mystery movie. And then like
Oh,
I'm just
yeah.
saying, it's fine. It's fine.
Hmm.
Not that I've made a movie nearly as good as Knives Out or anything, but I'm just saying. My movie was definitely better than the fucking, what was it called? With Sam Rockwell. What was that called? Now You See
So
Me?
see how they run.
See How They Run. Oh,
Did I
yeah,
call it Now You See Me in the
you did.
y-
You did.
it-
That was the Jesse
mother
Eisenberg movie.
Yes, in the lead up to this is a total tangent, but in the lead up to the See How You Run live episode that we did, I was like, oh, I'm going to be in front of an audience. I'm going to call this movie Now You See Me like 16 times. And I actually managed to not say it one time. And
Mhm.
here I am on
Yeah,
Glass Onion
live you
saying
didn't
the wrong
say it.
title.
Here on this
Yeah,
pre-recorded one, you've said it. Like that's
yeah.
pretty funny.
Unbelievable.
My wife has a
Ridiculous.
tendency to like do that with titles where she'll like confuse titles like that. And it's one of my favorite qualities about her. Like I showed her The Golden Child one time, and a couple weeks later, she's like, "What's that one movie we watched with the Asian kid? What was it called? The Hero Kid?" Like I,
Close enough.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's start getting into some puzzle pieces, Joe. What do you have for your first piece?
Oh, me first. I did not expect that. All right, let's start with the weirdest one that I had. Is Mad Monster Party.
Ooh.
um, which is a stop motion animation movie made for TV movie from the mid '60s. It's made by the guys who did the Rudolph special, the Christmas special, Rankin and Bass, and it's a this one though is more for Halloween, even though I think it actually came out in like March of that year. But it's about all the most famous monsters, Dracula, the Mummy, the Wolfman, Invisible Man, Frankenstein, even King Kong. They get invited to the island of Dr. Frankenstein, who
Mm.
is announcing his retirement because he's officially created everything that he could ever create, including this new like formula that has the power of an atomic bomb. And
Mhm.
all of the different monsters are like, "Ooh, I want that bomb and his fortune." So they kind of like start plotting and turning against each other to get to that formula. So,
Wow.
um, and that very much reminds me of the situation we're thrust into in Glass Onion, where you've got all these like famous actors who and then in the end of Mad Monster Party, you find out that like they're like robots created by Dr. Frankenstein, and so they're all like kind of like indebted to him for their life, much like Glass Onion, you know.
Sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
So and
What
then
what a puzzle piece to kick this off with, Joe. I mean, like, I was at first, I'm like, "Where is he going?" And then I realized, "Oh, wow, everything about Glass Onion is here."
right. Well, even when you look at it, the main character kind of looks like Rian Johnson. He's Dr. Frankenstein's nephew who kind of the guy doing the voice just kind of makes him sound like Jimmy Smith or Jimmy Smith. That's not who I meant. That's that's a football player. No, Jimmy Stewart. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, Jimmy Stewart. You know. So yeah, yeah, Mad Monster Party. That's my first one.
Wild. That is wild, and that sounds like a lot of fun. I need to watch that movie. That sounds like it would be a blast.
Yeah, we set up the projector on Halloween night. We invited friends over and we set up our projector in the front yard and I was like, "We're gonna watch Mad Monster Party." And then right before everybody showed up, I got nervous because that movie is kind of boring unless you like grew up with it. You know what I mean? It's
Sure.
it's really long. It should be like 20 minutes shorter, but like I don't
Right.
mind it. But I did. I panicked at the last minute. I was like, no. And when they showed up, I was like, let's watch Monster Squad instead. And
Mm.
that went over very well. So
Yeah.
but yes, definitely
Fair
see Mad
enough.
Monster Party.
Fair enough. Well, you started with the TV movie. I'll start with a TV show,
Mhm.
an anthology series from Mike White called The White Lotus, which is in its second season right now. But this movie, as was the first one, definitely a takedown of the rich and the 1%, and how these people can be such assholes. And while certainly Glass Onion is a murder mystery, it's also definitely a excuse to get these people together and have them turn on each other, and they're all stuck in this vulnerable place of being, on an island, and they kind of can't get away from one another. And while I haven't watched season 2 of The White Lotus yet, the first season was just absolutely fantastic. And you know, all these characters, they all are just so richly drawn and so just at each other's throats the whole time. And it's so much fun to like wonder who is going to kind of come out on top, even though you also want them all to kind of fail at the same time.
That's funny.
Yeah.
I just read actually this morning when I opened my laptop that they just got approved for season 3, so
Yeah.
they're onto something there. I
Yeah.
tried watching the first episode of that, and I just could not get into it at all. And so many people always say to me because there's a lot of shows like that where, like, Breaking Bad was another one, and people are like, "Oh, you gotta watch, like, until episode 4," and then and I'm like, "No, I don't. I don't have to sit through 4 hours of something to decide whether or not I wanna watch it." Like
Yeah,
like,
that's fair.
yeah, like but, but Mike White, I mean, talk about a guy who's been what a career that guy's had. You know what I mean? Like Orange County,
All
School
over
of
the
Rock,
place.
Chuck and Buck, and now this kind of like semi-thriller, like mystery show. I mean, like that's like good for him. You know, good
Yeah,
for him for his
absolutely.
longevity.
He seems like such an interesting guy.
Oh yeah. I actually met the guy who Chuck and Buck is about. The
Mm.
Have you seen Chuck and Buck?
Yeah,
Yeah,
back when it first came out a long time
yeah.
ago.
Like I met the guy who apparently is the Chuck to his buck.
Okay.
Yeah, and he's like, don't trust Mike. He's a creep. Um, um,
He would say that.
yeah, well, yeah, of course, especially if you saw Chuck and Buck, you'd be like, so that's how
Yeah.
you see me. I remember when the Stepford Wives came out with Nicole Kidman. He at the
Mhm.
beginning plays like the guy on her game show. And this is like
Mhm.
right at the peak of him doing School of Rock and stuff. And when he stepped out on stage in that movie, I'm in the theater and I don't know why, but like out loud, I just went, Mike White, like really loud. Like, you know, I don't know. That's the end of that story.
Yeah, that was that story ended with you just yelling Mike White. Like that's
Yeah,
like
I
how a
mean,
puzzle piece should be,
I
just yelling him out.
that's fuck you. Okay.
Okay. What do you got next?
What I have next. All right. I do want to dip a little into criticism of the movie. So my next puzzle piece is going to be Grand Budapest Hotel. Um,
Okay. A
um,
classic.
yeah, classic. Anyways,
Uh-huh.
I went to a test screening of that movie, and it was one of those ones where they're like, "You are the first audience ever to see the completed Grand Budapest Hotel," and I'm like stoked, because at that point he hadn't made a completely bad movie, and then like by the end I was like, "Is it too late to fix it?" But
Oh yeah,
one of
yeah.
my big problems with that, really, really, whatever. One of my big problems with the movie is the cameos in it. The cameos in that movie start to get really distracting, especially in the third
Mm,
act when everything is ramping up and he's supposed to be like, what are they called? Like the key holders or something like that.
I
The,
think so.
the
Yeah.
yeah, it's something like he's supposed to like wrangle them up to help him win the day, and it's like all these like cameos. It's Bill Murray and it's Owen Wilson, and it was just like they're popping up, and I'm like, I'm trying to get invested in what's going on here in the climax of the movie, and you're just distracting me with this like. And then they come into the scene and don't really do anything. It was just like, oh, you just needed a part for Owen and Bill, and I felt that a little bit with this movie. The beginning, he's in the bathtub playing some kind of computer game, and you got like all those cameos, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Natasha Lyonne,
Yeah.
and then a couple Steve Sondheim and Angela Lansbury. It's like, ooh, that half of that screen's a little cursed. But then like you got like Ethan Hawke popping up for a minute, like not
Eh,
playing Ethan
I
Hawke.
I thought that was a great cameo.
Sure, but like it was like weird. Like I think even someone in our audience went, "What?" Like because it was weird because he doesn't come back. He doesn't. And then like at the end you've got Hugh Grant, and I initially on the first time I saw it with you thought that he was just playing Hugh Grant. I thought the joke was that Hugh Grant and Benoit Blanc were
Oh,
lovers. But no,
he's with this celebrity. Yeah.
yeah, his name apparently is Philip.
Okay.
Upon rewatching it. So yeah, it's like, and that gets a little distracting to me. It's a little, I don't know. It's I get it. Everybody wants to be in a Rian Johnson movie, and I don't blame them. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But that did distract me a little bit. Watching the movie.
I will say, while I don't fully agree with you on that, because I thought that the cameos were a lot of fun a lot of the times. Like I thought they were well done. It did kind of make the whole thing feel a little contenty,
Yeah,
like it just seemed like a lesser movie in a way to kind of throw cameos in there just for that cameo wow factor. Like I really liked Serena Williams was on like that Peloton
yeah,
style workout video, just waiting, like, oh yeah, I'm on the clock. Like that was really funny, but it also just didn't feel like something you would see in, a bigger, movie.
yeah. And like to that, like I wanted her to like help them on the case somehow, like almost like the
Mm,
way that the mom helped them
yeah.
out,
Yeah,
at the
sure.
beginning, like, if Serena, like, pointed out something they didn't notice or, like, just do something with it other than make the joke. And
Right.
that's kinda how I felt about, Ethan Hawke at the beginning too. I was like, "Why is this Ethan Hawke?" You know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
um, I will say it's funny that after my wife and I saw it together, because 'cause I've seen it a couple times now, after we saw it together when we were leaving, I was like, "It's pretty cool, Benoit Blanc is gay and, blah, blah, blah." And she's like, "What?" And I was like, "He's gay with, like, Hugh Grant." And she goes, I thought that was his butler."
What? butler.
I know. Well, I mean, he is
I,
like baking bread,
yeah.
which is a
I
great funny COVID joke that he's like learning to bake bread. That's pretty cute.
Well, and let's be clear, there's a lot of COVID in this movie. For
Yeah.
anyone who hasn't seen it, hopefully people are listening that have seen it. But yeah, there's a lot of COVID. In a way, it feels like the ultimate like kind of combination of all the things we know about COVID were thrown into this, and most of it I think lands really well. Speaking of that Ethan Hawke character, there's a really funny joke in the beginning where of course, these are all like incredibly wealthy people, and they already have this cure that just involves a quick little shot in the mouth, and they're good. They're good
Yeah.
to go to
You're
not wear
good.
masks anymore for the duration of this Hollywood movie.
Yeah.
So
You know, I actually thought that the COVID thing kind of puts a weird, it almost felt a little quote unquote too soon. Like
in a
it,
way, it could have until that bit. I thought that bit just kind of solidified it and just made it kind of perfect.
well, then because you get to completely forget about it after that.
Exactly.
Well,
Yeah.
except for when they initially get to the island, they're like, "Can we hug?"
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say that was one thing though that like he tried to. So I've seen a couple times, and like I said, the opening I feel drags a little bit, like when they're all opening the box. Like
Hmm.
that could have been tightened and it drags a little. And I felt like watching it this last time when they all show up to the island with their different masks on, I was like, that would have been a
Mm.
more interesting way to introduce the characters. Like
Mm.
we get like a full backstory, or like we get to know who they are, then they get the box. That's like the structure of the opening scene. Bautista's
Yeah.
doing his webcast. What's her name's throwing the party. Kathryn Hahn is getting ready to like, do a Zoom, CNN thing. Like we get to know all of them, then they get the box. I would have much rather like, all their different masks show their different personalities in a weird way. I don't
Yeah.
know. I felt like pick one or the other. I don't know.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'll move on to another puzzle piece. Let's get to some of these. I got a few.
Yeah.
A lot of them are going to deal with rich people. I'm realizing as I'm looking at my list, but not all of them. But I'm going to go Wolf of Wall Street for my next one.
Hmm.
Just thinking about how greed and money turn people shitty, and this group of friends who they were kind of assholes to begin with, but getting hugely successful and then off of the backs of basically making money off of other people, just turns them from shitty to even shittier. And just that kind of greed is something that I think is like hugely being explored here and made fun of as it was in Scorsese's movie.
Yeah, I think that this one is a little less fatalist than Wolf of Wall Street, and I also think it's a little less cynical. And that's one of the things that I like about Rian Johnson is that he's not a cynical filmmaker, sometimes to a
Hmm.
fault. And that was one of the things about White Lotus that I really didn't like is like right out of the gate there's like a cynicism to that
Oh, very
show.
much so.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I just feel like especially with how easy it is to hate rich people these days and how you know what I mean, like
Hmm.
how many different movies like that we have, like Wolf of Wall Street. It's a little to me it's a little juvenile at this point to be cynical in that way in making these movies. Like I'm a little nervous to see that movie The Menu because of
Hmm.
it. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
I'm like
Which it's going to be exactly in that same wheelhouse for sure.
yeah, and I just hope that there's a little more to it, a little more meat to it, no pun intended. Like,
Oh,
that
nice.
because I'm just like I'm just not in that place anymore. I'm not coming from a place of resentment or bitterness or cynicism anymore. And so when that stuff pops its head up, I just get immediately check out. And
Yeah.
I thought that Knives Out and this movie both successfully poked fun at, you know, uh poked fun at that enough and drove home a really nice point at the end.
Hmm.
Knives Out more so than this one.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I remember thinking Knives Out and Parasite were the same movie. And that to me, Knives Out
Right.
was the much better version because it wasn't
Hmm.
coming from some kind of like angsty, cynical place, like
Right.
and literally Marta in that movie, she's so good that even the thought of lying makes her sick. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? Like the thought of not being, and he keeps driving that home in the first one. You are a good person. you know,
Yeah.
and she sticks to that, and that's how she wins in the end. You know what I mean?
Right.
And
Sure.
and this one, I'll say that the lead girl in this, they tried to make a similar thing, and I just it was not as strong to me. I will say that I thought that this movie was much more ambitious and successful in its ambitions, but I don't think it was as good of a movie as Knives Out.
And I think that's fair. I mean, it's kind of a very difficult thing to replicate without it just being, doing the same thing over again.
Right.
And like you said, it's certainly more ambitious. It's bigger, and it doesn't fumble that, which is it would be a very easy thing to mess up.
Right. Well, I mean, that actually kind of feeds into my next piece, because I guess this is where I'm gonna get into heavy spoiler territory for the movie.
Let's do
Um,
it.
which so about 2/3 of the way through the movie, it gets revealed that what's her name? The actress Janelle, um,
Janelle Monae.
Janelle Monae, that her character is not who she has been claiming to be the whole movie. She's been
Yeah.
claiming to be this one character, and it turns out that character's actually committed suicide before the movie even started. And this is her twin sister going undercover on the island to figure out, because she thinks somebody actually killed her sister, right?
Hmm.
And so I was trying to think of movies that, halfway through or whatever, go back to the beginning and then reassess the whole, give you a whole new lens to see the movie through. And
Sure.
the one that came to mind that I like the most, so I'm going with it, is The Skin I Live In,
Okay.
the Pedro Almodovar movie.
Yeah.
Have you seen that movie?
I saw it when it came out. It's been a long time.
Yeah, I hate spoiling it, but I will. But that, in that film, Antonio Banderas has this woman kind of trapped in a room that he, feeds and clothes, and she's a bit eccentric, and she's obviously trying to escape. And at one point, she tries to escape, but somebody breaks in the house and actually rapes her, and then they kill that guy. And then after this whole 30-40 minute intro to this woman who's been trapped, we then get a flashback. The movie jumps backwards in time and starts following this completely different story of this man who works in a dress shop. And basically what we find out is that guy kind of took advantage of Antonio Banderas' daughter, who went catatonic afterward, and Antonio Banderas extracted his revenge on that guy uh by kidnapping him, torturing him, and giving him a sex change and changing him into this woman who looks exactly like
Hmm.
Antonio Banderas' wife, who then we get another flashback. We find out Antonio Banderas had this wife who killed herself, who, you know what I mean? And then the movie catches
Yeah.
back up to where we are. And now we know that this is this man who has been turned into this woman who is Antonio Banderas' wife. And now how will he seduce Antonio Banderas as this woman now to escape? It's
Yeah.
fucking incredible movie. And
Oh yeah.
that's one of those movies that as a filmmaker you watch and you get super jealous. You're like,
Right.
damn, how did you do that? I remember when I saw that movie for the first time, I was like, you can only make a movie like that that's that good if you've been doing this for 40 years.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I could see Rian Johnson getting jealous of that movie and of all Almodovar, to be honest. Um,
Sure.
and I felt that that's one of the things about the ambition of this movie that I thought was really successful, is because basically 2/3 of the way through the movie, it takes you back through the entire movie.
Yeah.
You get
Yeah.
a 20-minute crash course throughout the entire movie again, and it works. And what you realize
Yeah.
after the movie is over, because at first when you're watching it, you're like, I thought this was a fucking murder mystery, and nobody dies. Bautista doesn't die until an hour and 10 minutes into the movie. But then what
Right.
you realize in that flashback, and by the end of it, oh my God, I've been watching a murder mystery from the beginning, from minute one. The murder
Mm.
happened before the movie started. Like,
Right. Right.
so and I remember thinking that Janelle Monae and that Daniel Craig both weren't very good in it. I was like, man, I don't think that he's way overdoing it, and she's I don't know what she's doing, but it's not working. And then it gets revealed that they're undercover and that Benoit Blanc is putting on a show, and I was like, wow, that's and her too. I'm like, that's a bold move.
Sure.
That's a really bold move to risk that. And again, I think they succeeded. which is why I'm glad I got to see it again before doing this episode with you, because
Yeah.
I had to make sure that yes, it actually works, and it does, and I'm jealous.
Right, right.
So
Well, that's I think a big part of why this movie feels so fun is just, it is riding high on that on like a very tightrope basically of trying to thread that line and succeeds, and you're along for the ride with Rian Johnson, who like just knows what he's doing the whole way through.
yeah, I remember one time my first thing I ever shot here in LA was a short film about Gary Glitter and Stevie Nicks, and Gary Glitter had been kidnapped by the real Don Steele and Lindsey Buckingham, and it was like this weird thing, and you find out that he and Stevie Nicks were in love and all this, but at the end it gets revealed that Stevie Nicks is a robot, and
Mm.
like it's a big like twist, and I cast this actress in it, and she had never acted before outside of her like comedy sketches or whatever, and I'd never met her before. We just did an audition, and she said, "How am I supposed to play this part?" And I told her, "I want you to be so convincing as this robot Stevie Nicks that until people see the end of the movie, they think you're not very good in the movie.
Mm.
Like they think that you're like there's something like not right about your performance, that it's a little robotic." Like,
That's tough.
and
That's
yeah,
a tough thing to pull off.
yeah, and you know what? To her credit, she really did it, and also to her credit, good for her for being willing to do that, especially given it was her first time, really acting in something. So
Yeah. That's awesome. That's great. Well, I'll go on to my next piece. Obviously, all of these people have been invited to their old friend, who's now this tech billionaire, played by Edward Norton, on his island compound, and that's kind of been a thing with a lot of movies lately. These tech billionaire characters that are like eccentric and ridiculous. But I'm going to go back to Ex Machina, with Oscar Isaac's character. Uh, and use that as the puzzle piece here, because Edward Norton is just ridiculous in his little world that he's built on this island, and I think to some of Oscar Isaac's little weird quirks and stuff like that in Ex Machina, and like the kind of weirdness that living that life would kind of give way to, and how strange of a character the guy would become. And I feel like there's a lot of like weird little ticks like that Edward Norton has.
oh yeah, I mean the single greatest movie moment of 2022 is and will be by the end of the year Edward Norton sitting on the shore playing Blackbird as
Oh
the
God, yeah.
as the boat approaches. That is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in a movie. Just yeah, and it's Ex Machina is a great piece because I think that movie had the exact same effect that Knives Out did, which is that like a lot of filmmakers saw that movie and wanted to do that too. And you're right, we've gotten a gajillion of these tech billionaire movies, and these detective movies ever since those films. And
Yeah.
I really liked, what was it, Spiderhead earlier this year?
Spiderhead earlier this
I
year, yeah.
loved that movie. I thought that movie was awesome. Um,
Mm-hmm.
much better than Top Gun Maverick. And I only say that because the same guy made it. But
I know, same director.
but I think that it speaks more to both those movies, Ex Machina and Knives Out. They were kind of like the canaries in the coal mine, where we know that technology and how we worship it is actually leading to our own downfall,
Mm-hmm.
and we also have started to suspect that the people in power are actually like using us, hurting us, manipulating us. And so we are Benoit Blanc. We are detectives. I mean, it's not a coincidence that that detective movies, have started spurting up, because we all want to know the truth of what's going on in our real fucking world right now. And the
Mm-hmm.
elite and the tech gods are the ones fucking us, so of course we're going to be making lots of movies about like, getting to the bottom of a mystery, and about how technology is actually like maybe evil. And
Yeah.
this movie is kind of the perfect blend of both.
Yeah, absolutely, and happens to be like really funny. So like they kind of like the sugar to make the medicine go down.
Well, but you have to be, because that's the actual truth, because it's so absurd, it's so ridiculous. Like what we do is absurd and ridiculous in life. And if you're not honoring that in what you're making, then you're actually just being didactic and or cynical. And
Mhm.
cynicism, in my opinion, is kind of like a very primitive reaction to have to something, or a very juvenile reaction to have to something, because it's the easiest and most self-satisfying. And really, at the end of the
Mhm.
day, what we're criticizing all these elites and tech billionaires of being is self-satisfying. Like they only care about themselves. So really, we're doing the poor man's version of that when we make shit that's like cynical and mean spirited, because it's like, okay, great. Who's that for? You? You're not the problem. So
Mm.
I don't know. Sorry.
Nah.
That's why I didn't like Parasite and why I like Knives Out.
This movie will get you in these directions, so I mean, it makes sense to get a little worked up. But what do you got for your next piece?
I got Primal Fear. Um,
Nice. Yeah.
Edward Norton's big debut. I think I even said that to you after we saw it together, that
Yeah.
because I mean, not to be that guy, but when I saw Primal Fear, like the whole movie, I was just like, no, he did it. Like Edward Norton's the killer. Like he's lying. He's not really crazy.
Mhm.
And then at the end, it's supposed to be like the big twist after he gets away with it. He's like, we did it, partner. And Richard Gere's like, what? How could I have not seen it? And I'm like, yeah, I agree. How
Right.
could you have not seen it? He's the fucking villain. And I felt that way about this one too. I felt that like
Mhm.
they're kind of just telling you right from the beginning that like, nope, he's the bad guy.
Oh, sure.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Whatever that may
Well, and
mean.
and I think he knows that we're all going to kind of think that because I mean we're all on the same page here. The tech billionaire is bad.
Right. Yeah,
Even if
exactly.
it's not Edward Norton.
All I knew is that it wasn't going to be Bautista. He's too kind. Um, that's interesting. I maybe even more so should have said Death on the Nile, which is one of my favorite
Mhm.
movies of the year. That's in my like top 3 of the year still, because I feel like that movie and this movie are both they both kind of tell you right out of the gate who the killer is. That's kind of the
Mhm.
point of these movies, and it forces you to like look at the movie from a different angle. Like, okay, so if
Mhm.
Edward Norton is the bad guy, I'm not trying to figure out who the bad guy is. So then what is this movie about? And same thing
Mhm.
with Murder or with Death on the Nile, where Death on the Nile, they tell you it's what's her name right out of the gate, basically. And so it's like, okay, so why am I watching this story then? And I think that Death on the Nile actually does it a little better, because Death on the Nile, well, obviously I do. It's one of my favorite movies of the year. But I think that Death on the
Mhm.
Nile, what you realize is that, oh, this film is about who is Poirot, and how Poirot is the one hiding the most. You know what I mean? And it's
Right.
Poirot discovering that about himself. He's literally been hiding his identity ever since the war, with that mustache and and I found that very powerful. This movie, uh, I'll get into it with my next piece, but it's very obviously not about the murder mystery. So,
Right. Right.
yeah, we'll get there.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah, I remember when Primal Fear came out, and like that run that Edward Norton had. I mean, it was just the best for for like a pretty long run of movies,
He was the
and
best unless you worked with him, apparently.
but yeah, as we've heard, but
Yeah.
man, were those movies great.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't
Um,
he follow up Primal Fear? Wasn't his next movie, wasn't it Everyone Says I Love You, the Woody Allen musical?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Good move, Ed. Good move.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I will go with I guess I could have combined this with Ex Machina, my last piece, but I'm gonna go with Spike Jonze's Her for
Mm.
my next piece because even though theme wise there's nothing really there, I think this movie is playing with a lot of like fun, not futuristic, but like current-ish technologies that feel a little bit of a ways off. And from that COVID shot that I get from in the beginning to everything on the island with like, haptic feedback that leads you towards your room and like all these like interesting little sci-fi ideas that are just maybe a year or two off, and we're
Mhm.
like right there. Of course, this tech billionaire has it all already, and none of it really works that well, it seems like, in certain scenes, because of course none of this tech ever does work the way it's advertised. But
Right.
it's fun. It's fun to see like the imagination of some of these things being thrown up on the screen and seeing how people react to it all.
I like the robotic dog bellhop that just, like, walks by in the
Yeah.
background once. I do wish, though, Yeah, because I like that stuff so much. Like you said, I wish that some of that had come into play. Like
Mhm.
it just doesn't come into play in any kind of meaningful way. You know what I mean? Which is weird. Like, because he writes like that usually too, Rian Johnson, where everything circles around and everything, and that just doesn't happen in this movie. So that kind of threw me off a little. Her is
Yeah,
an
I guess I could see that.
her
Yeah,
her
because
her
it eventually becomes more about just the people than anything.
right. Oh well, maybe that's what he's getting at.
Yeah,
Damn, David.
I guess so.
You did it. Well, her is funny because, as you know, I despise Spike Jones, and
Of course. Yeah.
yeah, of course he says, and I got to go to a very early screening of that, and I was surprised because I liked it. I was like, wow, I actually think that worked for me, and I was telling people for months, I was like, yeah, her is actually pretty good, and
Mhm.
when it came out finally, I invited a couple friends to go see it opening night, and we went and saw it. And about 20 minutes into it, I was like, "Oh no, it's not actually. My bad." And I took a nap. It just tricked me the first time.
Yeah,
And
sure.
and again, that's another one of these like cynical movies. I just found it to be like I feel like it's the kind of idea that a 13-year-old would come up with before they know what it's like to actually live life in any kind
Mm.
of meaningful way, um, aka moving out of your parents' house, and two, that
Mm.
like it just wasn't a very well thought out idea. Like it's like you have that idea, you're like, oh, that's a good idea, but if you think about it for like 5 minutes, you're like, oh, that's actually kind of dumb. I don't know. I remember Scarlett Johansson got us her when her name popped up in the credits, the audience gave her name a standing ovation, and I was like, what
That's
in the?
kind of weird.
And what was the company that did that movie? It was An-
Um.
Annapurna, right?
Oh yeah, you're right. It was an
Wh-
Annapurna film.
When
Yeah.
that popped up, when that logo popped up at the beginning, the audience erupted in applause as well, and I was like, what?
Well,
Like
they were the pre A24, so
yeah, I guess the first people to be like, I'm a rich privileged kid who wants to hang with the cool kids. I want to play artist. Um, Let me latch on to Darren Aronofsky. Um,
oh, Joe.
hey, here I am
Oh,
talking about
Joe
don't
and
be
his
cynical or
takes.
bitter or resentful. Right? Just shitting on him.
Hey, hey, hey. What do you got
Whoops.
for your next piece?
I only have one more, man. And
Yeah.
this is the one that I'm pretty convinced of. This movie is actually about The Last Jedi.
Oh,
This movie
all
100%
right.
is about The Last Jedi. You've got, where to begin? Well, first of all, Edward Norton is J.J. Abrams. Um, because,
Okay.
well, think about this. When they do the flashback to the origins of how the group was formed, what is Edward Norton dressed as? He's dressed as Tom
Yeah.
Cruise from Magnolia. What
Tom
was
Cruise
J.J.
and Magnolia.
Abrams'
Yeah.
first movie? Mission Impossible
Was
3.
it? Was that his first? Okay.
That's the
Yeah.
first movie he
Yeah.
directed. So here, yeah. So and Rian Johnson makes a point of this is a billionaire, whatever, privileged guy who actually is dumb and doesn't come up with anything original, right? And look at J.J. Abrams' filmography. You've got he did that, Mission Impossible 3, a third movie in a franchise that's a remake of a 60s TV show. Then you've got
Mhm.
Star Trek and Star Trek Into the Darkness, which are the exact same thing. Then you've
Mhm.
got Super 8, which everyone just totally criticizes as a complete and utter ripoff of Steven Spielberg movies. Like there's
Mhm.
nothing original about Super 8 whatsoever. Then you've got the Force Awakens, right? Now, the Force Awakens is Star Wars. Star Wars is like kind of like the mecca of pop art in our modern
Mhm.
culture, right? What does Edward
Yeah.
Norton keep in his glass in his museum? What did he take that should not be for him but should be for all the people? The Mona Lisa, right? Which is like
Right.
the original pop piece of art, right? And he's got that and he's keeping it in his glass house all by himself, right? And what happens to the Mona Lisa in that? That shit has to burn down to expose the monster for who he is, right? So
Mhm.
Ryan Johnson is kind of I don't want to say that he's Janelle Monae's character. I want to think that that's more Rose, but when you think about it, you've got this side character who's the minority female character who's being ignored the whole movie, and nobody takes her seriously. They all just think she's a bitch and that she's trying to ruin everybody's good time. And you know what I mean? That's The Last
Yeah.
Jedi. But then what happens 2/3 of the way through the movie? We go back and actually are forced to see it from that person's perspective, and we see the value in it. And it points out that the rest of these elites who are trying to shut it down, which are like, social media giants, politicians, like all the people, all the elites who are in control of us, they're the ones saying that this sucks because they can't actually embrace what it means to be the last Jedi. And they're all
Wow.
shitheads. And we
Mhm.
get this new perspective, and I mean, that's totally what this movie is about. And unfortunately, I think that part of it is a little scary because she says at the end, Janelle Monae says to them, "You would lie for," because they won't stand up for her after Edward Norton burns the evidence. They won't stand up for her, and
Right.
she says, "You would lie for a lie, but you won't lie for the truth." And
Mhm.
I don't know that I like that message. Because and it's kind of a similar message to Knives Out, but I feel like Rian Johnson, he's talked about how he's trying to get back into Star Wars. Like he wants to do that trilogy that he had planned out. And if
Sure.
you look at his
Yeah.
Twitter and stuff like that, he's very, uh, he's showing a lot of gratitude and kindness and gratefulness to Disney and to all these, he's kind of playing the game again to get back in that door. And I wonder if that's him like trying to like lie his way back in to do some good. I mean, it's no coincidence that in Last Jedi, Yoda burns down the tree with all the scrolls, and that in this
Right.
movie, he's burning down the Mona Lisa. Like
Yeah.
it's not a coincidence. I personally, and you weren't doing your show when Last Jedi came out, but you and I have talked about it. We both really liked that movie.
Oh,
Um,
love it. Yeah.
and I told Rian Johnson that because I got to talk to him after the last screening Glass Onion I went to. I told him that, I personally think The Last Jedi is one of the best, if not the best, Hollywood released movie in my lifetime. And that after The Force Awakens, which was a total piece of shit, I refused to see any more Star Wars movies. And then my ex-wife, she wanted to go see the new one, and so I went with her only because it was Rian Johnson, and how 5 minutes into that movie, I felt like I was in good hands, and by the end of the movie, I
Mhm.
was so moved, I was in tears, it was so profound, and I turned to my ex-wife and I said, "That's one of the best films I've ever seen," and she turned and looked at me and went, "You liked that?" And that's when I knew she and I were gonna get divorced.
Yeah, sure.
And and I got to tell him that story, and he was a little, he was a little tipsy, so he really liked that story. But I mean
Nice.
that, and that movie, Star Wars, is about what the Force is and what the Force means. And one of the things that trips me out so much about that movie is how wrong people get it when they talk about it. Like they talk about like Luke dies, blah blah blah. And it's like he didn't die. Luke became
Mhm.
one with the Force, like
Yeah,
his
yeah.
mentors before him, or and they're like, "Oh, Rian Johnson says let the past die in that movie." I'm like, "No, the villain says let the past die in that
Mhm.
movie." What that movie is saying is stop worshiping the relics, stop worshiping the symbolism of Star Wars, and embrace what Star Wars actually was and move things forward. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like that's
Yeah.
that's that's what that whole scene with Yoda is about. It's not about destroying Star Wars. It's about these shitheads who are coming along and just making the same thing over and over again, but worse versions of it, claiming it for themselves and calling themselves geniuses, like J.J.
Right.
Abrams. You know, so
Damn.
that's what this fucking movie is about. It ain't about who done it.
I love it. It's a great theory, and like I don't disagree. I think it makes a lot of sense what you're saying, and Ryan Johnson is certainly one to sneak something like that in there. I mean,
We all
you
do it.
know,
Every filmmaker,
yeah,
especially if you're somebody who's getting to make $220 million, auteur films like this is. Isn't this movie like a $200 million budget?
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the biggest budgets that Netflix has
Yeah. Well,
given.
he gets to come from a completely personal place, and whether or not he's like, like that's what's going on in his life right now. You know what I mean? That's been like the biggest thing to happen to him in his whole career, you know what I mean? And so of course, that's going to be a part of what he's making. And he's such a
Yeah.
genius, like, like his movies or not, he's a brilliant mind,
Yeah.
and so that's where he's coming from, I think at least. And
Yeah.
it all lines up, it all tracks. So
So my last puzzle piece kind of themes that we've already been talking about here, but it's Ready or Not from 2019, which is a movie that Knives Out we used as a puzzle piece on the episode for that. So this is all coming back around and to the whole murder mystery genre that, like we've said, is kind of having that resurgence, but especially with the takedown of the rich and powerful and the lengths they'll go to hold on to that. And they may act like they're for all the little guys and everything, but when it comes down to it, they'll, do whatever they have to do to hold on to that final, like, dying grasp of their power. And it's a fun movie. It's not as good as Knives Out, of course, and not as good as this, but I think is definitely coming from a place of just like a kind of fun old school thrill ride of a movie.
that's the one with Samara
Yeah,
Weaving, right? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, I didn't see that, and I never will. So
Mm,
I just
yeah.
it looks like a good movie for what it is, but like again, it's just like that kind of like mean spirited, shitty perspective, and also
Mm-hmm.
like I just really don't like her. Um,
Mm.
so like I don't really have any draw to go see it, but you know, I have been surprised a lot here lately with some of the movies that I've been seeing that I've really liked. So like, who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe one day. Like I
Well,
saw,
and I would imagine she's probably on a short list for Knives Out 3, so you'll be seeing her
I,
again at some
I
point.
don't know. I don't. Maybe you know what? I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier, and I'm never gonna see that movie. At first, when you were saying Ready, I was like, he better not say Ready Player One because I can't. You know. Um.
That would be an even worse setup for
Yeah, you're
for,
right.
for where things would go.
I thought you were gonna say Ready Player One
I,
because of the terrible CGI environments. That's my biggest criticism of all of Glass Onion is the glass onion. Whenever they're in it, it just looks the green screen backgrounds are so bad. Like
mm,
they like in Daniel Craig's hair, it's just I mean, it looks so bad. And I wish that they had done what Joe Kosinski did on Oblivion, where Tom Cruise has that house in the sky. And instead of doing green screen, they actually put IMAX cameras on top of a mountain and shot in 360 and then rear projected that footage against big screens that circled around the set so that it, you know
hmm
what I mean? I wish I
Well, isn't
would,
that what they're doing now with a lot of like the Star Wars stuff and everything? Isn't that like the new thing? Like these projected backgrounds,
yeah, but those are
like
like,
on the sets.
those are also like digital backgrounds though, too. You know what I mean? Most of the time, like,
Right.
like made digitally. And I think that that would have really helped the look of Glass Onion. And I can't imagine it would have cost more if they had done that rear projection idea instead of doing the green screen.
Hmm.
And again, I don't think that this movie is like I don't even think it holds a candle to the to Knives Out. But like that would be unfair for it almost feels like a movie that Rian Johnson just executive produced and came up with the story. And
Mm.
like somebody else directed this one. But and I do think it's his weakest film, but honestly, if after 20 years in the industry your weakest film is Glass Onion, you are doing something very right.
You're doing some, yeah, very, very right for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
But let's. I know, Joe. You have private messaged me about bringing back the finished puzzle. I'm going to bring back the finished puzzle. How about that? Let's
Oh,
talk. Let's list down all the movies we just talked about, and then we'll get into some more closing thoughts here. But we talked about Mad Monster Party, The White Lotus, The Grand Budapest Hotel, The Wolf of Wall Street, The Skin I Live In, Ex Machina, Primal Fear, Death on the Nile, Her, The Last Jedi, and Ready or Not. I agree that it's no Knives Out, but at the same time, I had a lot of fun with this movie. I
mm,
don't think it's that far off. I think you don't get the impact of Knives Out just kind of coming out of nowhere. And like, of course, we love Rian Johnson, but like we weren't expecting a movie like that to show up, and
right.
so it kind of gets that wow factor. And you certainly don't get that this time around. But I still think it's a really fun movie.
Oh, I would tell everybody go see it in the theater. Like I wouldn't even say watch it on Netflix. Like I really liked the movie a lot. Like I really
Yeah.
did. But like you said, like I went into Knives Out expecting a great movie because I thought Rian Johnson couldn't do a bad movie, and I still think
Right.
that. But what I got when I saw Knives Out was like it's one of his strongest, if not his strongest works. You know what I mean? It's
Right.
that script is so incredible. Its themes are so like potent, and like the performances are so in tune with each other. Like, funny enough, the main performance I was missing out of the last film for this one was Lakeith Stanfield as the detective.
Mm.
Like I loved him in that movie. It's a small
Oh,
part,
he's
but
great.
you know, and after the last screening I saw, in the Q&A, Rian Johnson and Kate Hudson specifically were talking about how important it is for comedy to ground your characters, and that's what makes them blah blah. And I could not disagree more, actually. Um,
Hmm.
like I actually think that Kate Hudson, that's one of the things that's not as strong, because I feel like a few of the performances in this movie just aren't great. Kate Hudson being one of them. No, you don't ground that character. You don't have to ground any of these people, because these people are not grounded. If you met that person in real life, they are not grounded. Their head is in the fucking clouds. And that's why
Right.
Knives
Right.
Out was so good. But in Knives Out, when you look at that cast, you're working with a more veteran cast. You're working
Yeah.
with Don Johnson, Jamie Lee Curtis. These people have been doing this a long time, and this is a younger cast. You know what I mean? This is other
Yeah.
than Edward Norton, and I think it speaks volumes that Edward Norton is the best in the movie. You know,
Oh, sure.
um, so like, you know, I say that it's not as good specifically because I'm coming at it from a filmmaker eye. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
But like, to people who just enjoy watching movies, like it's going to be the same movie on a quality level. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So like, I put it in the really, really good camp, maybe even the very good camp, just not the like, crowning jewel camp that I put Knives Out.
Sure. Yeah,
So
that's fair enough. Absolutely. I think one other closing thought to like kind of have, and I kind of just had the same one right before this. I recorded an episode on Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. It's interesting between these two movies. I don't know if you've seen White Noise yet.
no.
I loved White Noise, and I know you aren't. I don't think you're a fan of Bombeck. I generally am not, but I loved it though. Netflix putting out some really interesting stuff this year, I feel like.
At a really expensive price tag. White Noise is $150
Yes.
million dollars.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
180, I think.
180 fucking million. Fuck
Yeah.
Noah Baumbach. But I will see it because, it's Greta's first time in a movie in a long time, and
Mhm.
you know, that kind of love never dies. So
Sure,
I'll
sure.
be seeing it. But I mean, and again, I'm sorry, but like it's just too much money. And same thing with this. It's like $200 million. Like, come on. You know what I mean? Like that's just so. And because of that $200 million, now suddenly my Netflix subscription is going up. There's going to be ads in it. There's going to be, you know what I mean? That's the kind of
Yeah.
like shitty thing that happens. It's like, you don't need $200 million to make this movie, and we kind of bear the brunt of it because of it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and now, and it's so weird how everybody now is like, "Oh, I love Tubi. I don't mind commercials again, and I don't mind." It's like, God, like, are we being played like a fiddle, folks? That like the whole beautiful thing about
Yes.
streaming was that we didn't have to have ads, and as soon as they offered it on YouTube where you could pay $10 a month and not have to watch fucking commercials, like I did that because that's the app that we all watch the most, really,
Yeah.
So like, just it's out of control. Like it was white noise. Did it need a?
It is out of control, but at the same time though, if we don't have these ridiculous budgets, like what's the alternative is this movie being, hampered by like really bad shots and probably lit badly and
That's not true,
the
man.
cast is
No,
I don't know,
nobody would.
look at some of the streaming movies of the last decade,
Yeah, but
like
the difference between $200 million and $40 million is the catering.
well, it should no, you're right. These movies should be doable for that. But I don't know. I feel like we're finally getting a few good streamers and they're insanely overpriced, but we're finally getting some good ones.
Yeah, but again, they don't need to be this. They don't need to be that price tag. They don't need to be, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, Rian Johnson and Noah Baumbach and Martin Scorsese, they don't suffer the consequences of it. The people who watch the films do. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
well,
No, like not a well, because no, like there's no reason for this movie to cost more than $50 million, and for it to,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like there's just not. Like $200 million used to be like do you remember when like $200 million was like, how could you spend that much money on a movie? Wasn't Superman Returns the first $200 million movie or something like
I
that?
think you're right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I mean. Like,
Wasn't Ambulance like 40 million earlier
exactly.
this
And
year?
I
Yeah.
mean, that movie was a million times better shot than Glass Onion. Like, get out of here. Like,
Mhm.
that's what I'm saying. Like, there's no reason for these movies to have these price tags. Nobody needs that kind of thing. And I would think that as an artist, part of that responsibility would be like, oh wow, the people who I want to see this now, it's more of a struggle for them to see it. And like, I don't know, Tarantino talked about movie theaters movies used to be the blue collar art form, like
Mhm.
baseball, like how you could pay $5 for a baseball ticket, sit in the sit way out up in the nosebleeds and just drink a couple beers, eat some peanuts, and just be there all day. That's why baseball was so popular. Same thing with movies.
Yeah.
Movies used to be, $5 to $6 a ticket. Get a couple hours of entertainment, cool, go home. But now it's like you literally are like negotiating, where it's
Yeah.
like, if I want to see an IMAX movie, that's $21. It's like that's 2 hours worth of work for me. So it's like an even trade of my time. Fuck you. Like
Yeah.
you better be the best movie ever. And
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, they're, Pearl. So I don't know.
So I guess Pearl's not going to be your recommendation, but Joe, is there a movie that you watched recently you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
Yes, there is actually. And honestly, it's two of them. Because I saw two movies this week that both completely took me by surprise. One of them was Terrifier 2, and
Mhm.
the other one was Wakanda Forever. I never planned on seeing Terrifier 2, and I, of course, planned on seeing Wakanda Forever, but I did not, I didn't care for the first Black Panther, and all these Marvel movies lately have been watchable at best. I mean, Doctor Strange was okay, whatever. But I absolutely loved both of these movies. Like, I thought Terrifier 2 was actually kind of incredible. And I didn't know anything about it going in, except that it was, a sequel slasher movie. I didn't know that it was only made for 250,000. I didn't know that it was 2.5 hours long. I didn't even know that by the end of the movie. I didn't feel like I had just been there for 2.5 hours.
Wow.
And Wakanda Forever is another one that, like, it's a film that's truly about grief, and it's one of the worst. The visual effects in that movie are at an all-time low for a Marvel movie. And I heard a lot of people complaining about how dark and hard things were to see and all that. But I watched the movie and I didn't agree. I thought that the way that the movie was shot was beautifully in tone with what the movie was about, which is about not only grief and loss, but also having to confront your shortcomings when that happens. Like, I think that's another movie where Ryan Coogler, like, the death of Chadwick Boseman had a great effect on him and kind of threw him into like this tailspin of like, who am I? Have I been doing this wrong all along? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And that's what Wakanda Forever is about. And I think that it's a very brave movie because it's about something not being right and kind of landing on that like, oh wow, this is wrong. But now I don't know what right is still, but now I'm open to it. And the
Yeah.
movie ends in kind of a fearful place in a good way, but like that good kind of fear. You know what I mean? That fear of the unknown that you're about to embrace, Star Trek. So I
Mm.
highly recommend Terrifier 2, and I highly recommend Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. Big time.
Right on. Very
So
cool recommendations. I do need to see Terrifier 2. I didn't know anything about it either going in, but of course it's like one of the big success stories this year, and it sounds ridiculous, but
well, I was
fun.
I was
I
watching
want to
it.
see it.
I was watching it halfway through. I was like, maybe I should check out this first one. And then after the credits of Terrifier 2, they had like a little like interview with the director, and he was talking about. He's like, yeah, with the first one, we were just trying to introduce this character, so the movie's more just like about this psycho clown, and like it's just him killing people, and there's no real story. So this time we wanted to tell a story, and I was like, okay,
Mm.
cool. So I don't have to watch the first one. Like
Perfect.
that's
Yeah.
fine.
It's like, thank you, director. Thank
Yeah,
you for letting me know.
you could have spared me
Yeah.
X, Ty West. Like, take notes. I did. I said that.
There he is.
I said that. I said in one of my rare Letterboxd reviews, I said that this is like what a Ty West movie would be if Ty West had any guts, heart, brain, talent, or creativity.
That's why we get Joe on the show. Joe, I know you just had another great screening of Natasha Hall. Tell us what else is going on with you and your films.
Natasha Hall is actually will be available on demand in the next few months here. We are finally in distribution, so that's very exciting, and we are in pre-production now on a sequel that we're going to be shooting at the end of December into January. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, a lot of good Natasha Hall stuff coming here, and we're also trying to turn it into a TV show. And Natasha Lyonne is now in a Rian Johnson created television series where she's a detective, and I find that really funny because Natasha Hall's name came from a combination of Natasha Lyonne and Rebecca Hall. So 2 years later. See, I told you, David. Natasha Hall 2 years ago, and then son of a bitch.
Amazing.
Yeah,
amazing stuff.
Good Lord. Anyways,
well, Joe, where can they find you?
BlueMeansPregnantFilms.com is my website where you can see a lot of my films. They won't be up there for too much longer, some of them, because a handful of them are going into distribution. So, there's plenty of my films on there, as well as like all the short films and documentaries about the making of. You can follow my company and my friends' artistic journeys and become a part of the community on BlueMeansPregnantFilms.com. Yeah.
Awesome. Joe, as always, great having you here, and look forward to next time.
Me too. Thanks, David.
Hi, it's Zach, host of the Belated Binge podcast, where I'm re-binging the Harry Potter series. I didn't read these books until my mid-20s, but now I'm going back, a chapter or two at a time, with some of the Potterhead friends I'm making along the way, so that we can discuss some of the most important questions of the series, like, what did Dumbledore know and when? Why does Harry only know 2 spells? And are there any competent adults in the wizarding world? Belated Binge is full of theories, headcanons, adult humor, sarcasm, and spell puns. So Accio Belated Binge on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever you're listening on right now.
All right, so I hope you enjoyed that conversation about Glass Onion, and thanks to Joe Black for joining me on that one, and thank you to you for listening. If you enjoy what we do here on Piecing It Together, make sure you're subscribed, and while you're at it, if that app that you're subscribing on happens to have a 5-star button, we'd really appreciate your 5-star ratings and reviews. It helps make sure that the show rises up in the rankings and more people see it, more people listen, and then we'll cover some more movies. Speaking of movies, we got a lot of episodes on the way. I recorded like 3 last week. I think I'm recording 2 more this week. It's there's a lot of movies out there, and trying to cover as many as we can. So yeah, follow us on social media at PiecingPod. Join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces. And I told you about the Patreon at the top of the show, but check that out too. Produced by David Rosen. If you want to support the show that way, we definitely appreciate it. But also just keep listening. I told you I've got a new album coming out called More Content. The pre-order starts on December 2nd. The album comes out December 30th. And I'll be also posting a special commentary track of the album very soon here on the show as a bonus episode. But I'm going to close this episode out by playing a song from the album. This is a song called Boiling Point. Hope you enjoy it. We'll be back with more Piecing It Together real soon.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.